So how many of you are familiar with the classic song, "There's a Hole in the Bucket"?
Never heard of it.
You may remember, yeah. How many of you saw that famous performance by Lisa and John Folse? That's going back a long time, so yeah, you'd have had to have been around quite a while in this church family type situation. But the song, "There's a Hole in the Bucket," dear Liza, there's a hole in the bucket. And, oh man, obviously we've been around 18 years, so and it was close to the time. So why did you do it? I thought you said when. I have no idea. It was John's idea, and I forget what it led into, but I'll always remember the performance. And again, the song, it's this idea, it's one of those songs that goes around and makes a big circle. There's a hole in the bucket, and then Liza says to Henry, we'll fix it. With what do I fix it? With straw. Straw's too long, and cut it with what? Knife's too dull, then sharpen it with what? The stone's too dry, then wet it with what? With water. Well, how do I fetch it with a bucket? Well, there's a hole in the bucket. And so it just goes all the way back around to that. And I'm not, sure the point of the song, but it's become somewhat of an expression to fix the hole in the bucket. And it's the idea that, it does no good to deal with the symptoms of a problem if you don't deal with the root cause. To keep pouring water in a bucket with a hole in it, you're never going to fix the fact that there's no water in the bucket that way. And I bring that up because, again, I believe that those of us who have made a commitment to God and to Christ, we truly want to live for Him the way He intends. Which means we want to stop sinning, and it will never be perfect and sinless, but we don't want to keep doing the things that we know are wrong, or we want to do the things we know are right to a higher, better, purer degree. We truly do, especially when those things that we struggle with cause disunity in our relationships. Again, no one enters into a relationship saying, I want to have problems and fights and arguments. We don't want that, but we do. Well, why don't we then just get past these things that are causing those problems? And I believe the reason is there's a hole in our bucket. There's something that's foundational. There's a problem that we can keep working on, anger or impatience or whatever you want to name, but if we don't fix this hole, it's never going to work. We're never going to truly live the life God wants us to live and experience the abundant life He wants us to experience. And so in James chapter 4 and into chapter 5, he talks about what the hole is, and then he gives some examples to prove his point, really. And so today, to get ready for the middle of James chapter 4, or really toward the end, we need to remind ourselves of what we looked at last week. And I put those verses on the sheet as well. James chapter 4, verse 1, he asked the question, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? And remember, we said that word for passions, it's not just, saying, I'm passionate about this in a good, positive way. It's the word for hedonism. These selfish, at any cost, passions and desires I have. And that's what he goes on to say. You desire and do not have, so you murder. And not literally, but he's just showing how serious it is and how serious we take it. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? He says there's two choices. You can be a friend with God and follow His principles, or you follow the world's. And it echoes back to what he talked about, worldly wisdom, of viewing the world through the world's eyes. And the world basically says, me first. And God's wisdom says, no, God first. But then he says, but God gives more grace. More grace than what? Well, more grace than it takes to live the life He expects of us. God doesn't just throw us out there on our own and say, here's what I want you to do, now do it. He will work in us and through us, just like it's His grace that brings about forgiveness and ultimately heaven. It's His grace that we need to live every moment in between becoming a Christian and either dying or waiting for Christ to return and experiencing that. God will do that, but look what it says. God opposes the proud, people who think they can do it on their own, but gives grace to the humble. Those are the ones who receive the grace. And then he closes that section. He says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Not just obey him, but sign the blank sheet. God, whatever you want. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. It's a choice we can make. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. He initiated the process, but now it's our choice. God, how near to you do I want to be? Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. And we said that whole thing is about repentance. You know, if sinning in this way, he called them sinners, double-minded. He says we need to repent of that, of not being fully committed to God, of not being fully humbled before him. And that's what verse 9 is talking about there, the attitudes of repentance. And then he ends it, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. So he's telling us the key. What causes quarrels and fights among you? It's the selfishness that puts me first. Well, he says the key is humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. The key is humility. The hole in the bucket is a lack of humility. That's what the hole is, and that's what these verses were talking about, the attitude of humility, how important, how necessary it is, what the key to all the Christian life is. And it makes sense. It shouldn't be a surprise. You remember when Jesus was asked by the disciples, who's the greatest in the kingdom? And they're all thinking he's going to name one of us. And Jesus tells them in Matthew 18, truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. They're like, who's the greatest? You know, when it all comes, who's going to have the highest throne, the biggest crown, all this stuff? He says, listen, if you aren't like little children, you won't even be in the kingdom. And what way like little children? He goes on to say, whoever then humbles himself is this child. He is the greatest in the kingdom. Humility is absolutely essential. To becoming a Christian, the humility that says, God, I need you. I can't do it on my own. I know I've fallen short. But the humility that then continues the rest of our lives as Christians. And we've said humility has two aspects. And I believe when I first talked about it back in Matthew, when we went over chapter 18, I said, here's where I'm at with humility now. I leave it open to the possibility of changing my definition, and I'm changing officially my definition of humility in this first aspect. I've been saying the first aspect is to realize our limitations. I think that's a subcategory. What I would say now, the first aspect of humility is realize God is God and I'm not. Realize that God is God and I'm not. Now, a big part of that is then to realize my limitations. I don't know everything because God is God. He knows everything. I'm not. I'm not, in control. Because God is God. He's in control. I'm not. Realize my self-awareness is limited. And this, James has been talking over and over about deceiving ourselves. Yeah, don't think that you even know completely what's in your heart. God is God. I'm not. And another side of that that's definitely going to come up is to think I deserve fill in the blank. No. God's God. I'm not. He's the creator. I'm the creature. I don't deserve so much of what I think I deserve. And usually I deserve something I don't want to realize I deserve. So that's the first aspect of humility. Again, the broader aspect, I would say now, God is God and I'm not. And then the second aspect of humility is value others above myself. In the verse in Philippians says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves. The New American Standard says, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Wow, you talk about something that's anti-cultural. View others as more important than you. That goes against our whole society. Which again, it goes against the world's wisdom. It's God's wisdom. That's what humility is. Humility, realize God is God and I'm not. Value others above myself. And that's what James was talking about that we looked at last week. That's the attitude. We try to fight this lack of water in our bucket. We try to fight our anger and our impatience and our greed just directly. Oh, I need to not be so angry or greedy or impatient. Well, the problem, though, is the hole. There's a hole in our bucket, and our hole is a lack of humility, one aspect or the other. Either I'm not realizing God is God and I'm not, or I'm not valuing other people above myself. And the main idea today, every sin struggle that we have, whatever issue we face the most often, has a lack of humility toward God or others as its cause. I really believe that. Every sin struggle. You take it down, you look below it, it's a lack of humility that's the reason for it. And if we just keep trying to confront the sin, we will never, ever fix the fact that there's no water in our bucket till we deal with the hole. So we looked at last week as we were looking at the beginning of James 4, I read verses 11 and 12, and I will humbly admit I shouldn't have. They go better today. And I was looking at the question, people say, well, do they fit with those verses above? Absolutely they fit with the verses above. But the thing is, they also fit with the verses behind them. And really, what we saw last week, James 4, 1-10, again, it's the attitude. Humility is essential. And then James gives three examples. Three examples of sins that have a lack of humility as their cause to show just what the main idea is. Every sin struggle we have has a lack of humility as its cause. So we're going to look at these, and our goal is to see how a lack of humility underlies each of these issues, and then, of course, to apply that to ourselves. The things I face, how is it that a lack of humility is the problem? How can I overcome that then? Again, I'll never be perfect, but boy, I can do a lot better. And I'll have a lot better success if I deal with the hole in the bucket instead of pouring water into a bucket that has a hole in it. So let's look at these verses that start with the ones we finished with last week. James chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. He says, "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. Therefore, there is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor?" So with each of these three examples, we're going to ask two questions. The first of all is, what is the sin that James is talking about? And the first thing we need to realize here is, what isn't the sin he's talking about? And every time it comes up, I feel like I need to go over it again, because this is probably one of the most misunderstood things in the Bible. The idea that the sin that's talked about when it says do not judge is to tell a person that what they're doing is wrong. You know, people who have no clue about what the Bible says, total unbelievers or people, whatever, if they know no other verse in the Bible, they know the first three words of Matthew 7:1. Do not judge. They don't need to know anything else about it, but they know that. Do not judge. It's everywhere. Well, what's that mean? It doesn't mean don't think that a certain action is wrong, and don't tell a person you're doing wrong. That is not what it means. Do not apply God's clear standards. Because the entire Bible, if you think about it, is based on a judgment. That some things are right and some things are wrong. We talk about the key verse of the Old Testament being Genesis 3:15. Of God saying, I'm going to fix this problem. Well, what caused the problem? God says it's wrong to eat from this tree, and Adam and Eve ate from the tree. They did something wrong. The whole Bible then is based on a judgment. Certain things are right, certain things are wrong. If you violate those, you have sinned. And then the rest of the Bible is saying, God says, I still love you, and I'm going to provide a way to overcome that sin. But that doesn't deny the fact it is sin. Certain things are wrong. And for us to tell someone what you're doing is wrong is not what the Bible talks about when it says, do not judge. What James is talking about here and what the Bible talks about is applying our own law, our own version of the law. Or applying the law unfairly, maybe selectively, like I pick and choose, well, you're not following God's law in this way, and sort of ignore the fact that in this situation that's going on, I'm not following God's law in this way. That's what he's talking about. It's what it was talking about in Matthew when Jesus says, do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. Again, we're all going to be judged by God. You know, whatever your end times view, we all agree there's going to be at least one judgment. Some views have 2, 3, whatever. We're going to be judged. We're going to stand before the great white throne, and God's going to look at the books that tells everything that's happened in our lives and say, what you did that day, that time, it was wrong. He's going to look at the book of life and see who has accepted forgiveness for those, but we're going to be judged. But this verse, the key is, the context to understand do not judge is verse 2, for in the way you judge, you will be judged. Or if you judge people unfairly, selectively, by your twisted version, your own personally beneficial version of the law, you'll be judged that same way. That's what it prohibits. That's what he's saying when he says, do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges him. It doesn't even bring judges in at first. Speaks against, talks bad about someone, speaks evil against the law and judges the law. It's me saying, wow, the Bible doesn't specifically say this or doesn't say it this way, but you need to shape up and not do what you're doing. And again, either to bring something in that's not there or to say you need to do this when I ignore the fact. The same context in the Sermon on the Mount, you have the whole idea of you pointing out the speck in someone else's eye when you've got a log in yours. That's what it's talking about there. So that's the sin. And it's not saying something is right or wrong, because there are things that are right or wrong, and we should say. Now, speak the truth in love. It's a whole other side light to that, but we should say. Don't do it ourselves, our own law, or unfairly. Well, how does that come from a lack of humility? Well, think about it. Look what it says here. If you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. What's it mean to judge the law? Who gave us the law? God. So I'm saying, God, you didn't do it right. You didn't say everything you should have said because I've got someone doing something, even though you didn't say they shouldn't do it, I say they shouldn't do it. You left that out. I'll add it. And that's what James goes on to say. There is only one lawgiver and judge, and it ain't you. That's what he left out. He figures that you'll get that, right? I don't need to write that you aren't him. You know that. Well, doesn't that sound like there's only one God, and I'm not him? That's what he's calling about. That's how it arises from a lack of humility. There's only one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and destroy. Hey, remember that. He's the eternal, all-powerful judge. You're going to stand before him. And it's said, again, it's not the fact that we miss God's intention for us. God knows that. But he says, don't twist my law and principles and apply them unfairly to others and selectively and think you're different, you're better, and twist. And again, the whole point of the law, to point out, you have missed it, it points the need for grace. And we point out to other people, you've missed it, and we don't show them any grace. They may be missing God's law. Okay, we all do. But again, part of the law, the essence of it, from the lawgiver, is you're right, you haven't, but boy, I love you so much, I want to help you get there. And oftentimes that's not our motivation. It's just, we just stop at you haven't kept it. And we might not even realize this. We might not even realize that we're applying our own law or unfairly or selectively. It's one of those deception things. It just makes so much sense. Well, of course you're not doing what you should be doing. I'll point it out. That's the problem in our disunity situation here. You're not following God's law. There, settled. Shape up, we'll all be good. Boy, how often has that been the problem where it's one person is, there's issues, but boy, we've got to deal with it according to God's law, which applies to both of us, and in the spirit of God's law, which says the purpose is to be shown grace, to point out the need for grace, to show us, I need your grace, God. Well, in our personal relationship, it needs to show us, I need to show grace to that person. Yeah, they have missed God's law. You know what? Even if I haven't in this specific instance, I've missed it myself, and I need his grace. They need me to show grace, not me to just point out how far short I've fallen. That makes sense? So there's this first example. It's pretty clear. There's the lack of humility that's causing it. Well, then he goes on in verse 13 of chapter 4, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. All right, let's look at that. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. That seems innocent enough, doesn't it? It's a businessman saying, hey, we're going to go. And they did this. They would travel. Some of them would not stay in the same place. They'd travel around. We're going to go here. We've been here. We've been there. We're going to go to this place. We're going to stay there a year. We're going to make a profit. Sounds innocent. I mean, as a business person, you need a plan. You need a goal. It sounds harmless. But then James points out, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Is there anything more obvious than that? Is there anything that requires, I don't have to prove that to anyone. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. Think of all the tomorrows you didn't see coming. And they may be good tomorrows, they may be bad tomorrows. You know what, I had no idea the day before Lisa's sister slid into a pew next to me on a Sunday night and said, hey, do you remember my sister Lisa? She's going to be home for Christmas. Well, I didn't see that tomorrow coming. And everything it brought. That's the same way we got our kids. Lisa and I are sitting at a table and we get a call from her sister, hey, want to adopt a child? Then we get another call as that baby's born that says, nah, don't come up to the hospital. The mom changed her mind. And then we get a call one day when we're at the fire station back in Indiana from Lisa's same sister, hey, want to adopt a child? Yeah, we blame everything on her, one way or the other, our whole family. Wouldn't be here. It's all Aunt Sue's fault. Yeah, that's our phrase. Talk about tomorrows you didn't see coming. And you all could list off hundreds of those yourselves, couldn't you? That is just so basic. Well, that's what James is saying. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. And then he goes deeper. He says, what is your life itself? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. It's just that not just that you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, it's the nature of our life. Not just our limited capacity to know and control, but our life is fleeting. It's a mist, relatively speaking. It is so short and we don't know when it's going to end. You know, that right there should put things in perspective. You know, I thought about it. You know, they've got a movie, Rise of the Apes and this or that. There's no movie, Rise of the Mayflies. You know, they live 24 hours or less. They're not a real big threat. They can't do anything of substance. Well, that's what James is saying. Realize that compared to God, you're like a mayfly. Don't overestimate your abilities here. Come on. Keep them in perspective. Yet we don't. And we don't even think about it. Instead, verse 15, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And when he says you ought to say, it's not just some formula that I'm going to make my plan and, oh, if the Lord wills. Make my plan if the Lord wills. No, this needs to be your attitude, your perspective for acting, the lens that you look at life through. There's nothing wrong with having goals and making plans, but it all needs to be not just this little trite phrase tacked on, if the Lord wills, but a whole perspective that says everything in my life is based on that, if the Lord wills. And we keep it in mind, this relationship between God and us. As it is, in other words, without doing that, you boast in your arrogance. Psalm 27 says, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. He's saying the same thing. Don't boast about it. Oh, this is what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. You're arrogant to think you do, and that's what James is saying. You're boasting in your arrogance. I know what tomorrow's going to bring. Let me tell you. How arrogant is that? I have no idea. We've all seen it over and over. It's, again, one of the most proven facts we could have. Establish things in our life. You know, don't boast in it. Don't think it. Don't act like it. He says, all such boasting is evil. And I read that through the first time. I thought, well, that seems a little extreme, James. Evil? I mean, you know, murder's evil. And, you know, that's evil. This is just like a little misguided, isn't it? He says, all such boasting is evil. And one thing it reminded me of, all of our actions, all of our attitudes are related. We can't have arrogance in this area of saying today or tomorrow I'm going to this city and do this, or tomorrow I'm doing this at my job, or this or that, and just arrogantly say I have any true idea or control over it in this area, and not have that lack of humility affect everything else. That's why it's evil, because it doesn't just stay in that little area. It clouds our whole life, our whole attitude, our whole perspective. That's why it's evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Now, you've heard me quote this verse many times, and in general it points to the fact that sin is not just doing the bad thing we know we shouldn't do, but if there's something good we know we should do and we don't, well, that's sin too. And we know we're supposed to spend time in the Word. We know we're supposed to be generous. We know we're supposed to pray to God. We know we're supposed to all these. If we don't do the good, that's sin also, but realize it was given in a specific context. This isn't like a separate paragraph of its own. Specifically, what James is saying to these people is like, you know what? You may not have realized prior to this that saying today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and make a profit. You may not have realized that was evil, but now you know, stop it. Now that you know, to know the good and not do it is sin. Quit having that perspective. So what's the sin here? Arrogance, isn't it? This overestimation of myself, that I'm able to know way more than I'm able to know, that I'm able to control way more than I'm able to control. That's the sin here, arrogance. Well, how does it come from a lack of humility? And this one's pretty easy. Arrogance is the very opposite of humility. I thought it was interesting. This one that seems the most innocent of the three examples, like saying, hey, we're going to go into a town and make a profit. I mean, doesn't seem like a big deal. Not, the one we're going to see next is really bad, and even the one judging someone else, that one's pretty bad. This one seems the most innocent, but you know what? It's the clearest to be the opposite of humility. I mean, the other ones you have to look at them and say, in what way are they the opposite of humility? This one's like the antonym. Arrogance and humility, those are the opposites. It's the clearest of all, but it seems the most innocent. I thought that was interesting. Thing we do the most often. Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, this is going, hey, I'm going to do this and this. Here's what. James says, no, stop it. That's evil. And it doesn't say you're a terrible person. What he's saying is that's just making that hole in your bucket bigger and bigger and bigger. It is an evil thing to do. It's a bad thing to do. Because it just undermines your whole intention of trying to live your life for God. To just feed this lack of humility. Well, his third example. Chapter 5, verse 1. He says, come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Wow. Yeah. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. And the context makes it clear. This is talking about end time stuff. This is final judgment, not just difficult times here on earth. Well, the key, though, as we look at this, what brings the miseries on the rich? It's not just the fact that they're rich. If you're rich, you're automatically going to hell. The Bible doesn't say that. James isn't saying that, and he's going to make it clear. He's going to say some things. Here's what it is about you in your state of being rich. This is the problem. Well, what is it? He says your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and really it's more the idea of tarnished. And riches then, again, a little different than now. Clothes were a big part of it. If you were rich, you had several sets of clothes versus just maybe one or two. And the thing is about their riches, in one way or the other, they were all susceptible to, as it says, the idea of things rotting and being moth-eaten or tarnished. And so when you think about all those, how would that happen to their riches? How does think about it even today. if you have some clothes, how do they get moth-eaten? Well, they're probably stored away, right? You haven't worn them. You're taking them out every other day, regular. They're not going to get moth-eaten like that. Well, that's what he seems to be saying here is all this stuff, you got extra. You've got more than you need. You've got more than you need. That's the problem. And he goes on to say, and their corrosion of all those things, that they're being moth-eaten and corrosion, will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. What's the evidence against them? What's saying that in your state of being rich, here's your problem. Here's the sin. What is the evidence against you? It's that you've laid up treasure. The New American Standard says you've stored up treasure. Now, don't get me wrong. The Bible's not against saving. It's not saying, well, you should just have absolutely just enough to get by. No, it says in Proverbs 21, the wise stores up choice food and olive oil, but the fool gulps theirs down. It's wise to save. But the point is, they had more than they need. They were even beyond just a wise, point of saving and preparing. They had more. The NIV says you've hoarded your wealth, and that's really the idea. So that's the key to the richness that brings misery. It's when you've hoarded things. It's when you have more than you need. I think it's always interesting. We talk today, and I bet you've heard it. Who is rich? And have you ever heard anyone say, well, the majority of the world lives on $3 a day or $5 a day, and we all live on more, we all get more than that, so we're all rich. I don't think that's right. There's a lot of people today making way more than $3 or $5 a day. No one would call them rich. Not at all. Here's the point. If the cost of living, if you're making $10 and the cost of living in your area is $5, you're $5 ahead every day. If you're making $100 and the cost of living in your area is $150, you're in the hole $50 a day. So it's relative in terms of who is rich. But the point that James is making is what you do with those riches. He's talking about rich people, not just rich in general, but rich that have this bad trait, this bad habit. And what is it? It's hoarding. It's having more than you need. Matter of fact, more than you can even use. The stuff's just going, it's being moth-eaten, it's being corroded because you can't even use it. You've got more than you need, more than you can use. And so I thought about that for us. More than we need. How many of us have more than we need in so many things? The Bible doesn't say it's wrong to have some nice things. The Bible says it's wrong to have nice things that are tucked away in a closet that you never, ever use. There's other things that can happen with that money. The Bible says it's wrong to be greedy instead of generous. Again, to have certain things, the Bible doesn't say that's wrong. To have them that you're just not even using, that's the problem. And he says it will eat your flesh like fire. Again, it's metaphorical. Your very riches that you're so pleased with, so fond of, they're going to be your downfall. Things you work so hard to get. In the last days, you've laid up treasures, you've hoarded wealth in the last days. Well, we saw in the End Times Bible study that we've been in the last days ever since Jesus left. So we don't know when Jesus is coming back, but that's really the point he's making. He says you're doing this even with the fact that Jesus could come back at any time. It's like kids. Kids, if you don't know this, if your parents leave you alone for a while, don't wait until they're just about to come home to make the mess. Make it early and have time to clean it up. Well, James is saying, Jesus could come at any time here. This is not a good time to be living like this. And we're still in the last days, so it applies to us as well. He goes on, behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which have kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. So again, the problem is not just they're greedy. Here he's saying you're dishonest. And I thought about it. It's hard to restrain our greed from turning into dishonesty. If we've already violated God's principles and been greedy, we're just going to keep taking it further and further. It's not just, okay, I got this honestly and I'm not being generous. It's going to keep going to the point that, the line of what's honest and dishonest gets blurred as well. The laborers he's talking about in his day were day laborers. These people would go, and we see this sometimes here, people wait for a job for a day. What it means is they didn't get paid till the end of the day, and they had nothing. It's not like the wife bought groceries at the beginning of the week, and so they're fine on Monday or Tuesday. No, if they didn't get paid that day, they didn't eat that night, they and their family. That's what he's talking about here. And then he says, the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. The point is, the rich think there's no one to defend these poor. There's nothing they can do against me. They can't take me to court. They don't have the means to do it. James is saying, you know what? Who's heard the cries of these people? God has. And he specifically says the Lord of hosts. That word means armies. Armies of angels. You see who the poor have on their side when you are oppressing them like this? The implication, of course, is that eternal judgment that he was talking about. You have lived on earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. Again, luxury, and that's one of those words. Well, what's it mean to be in luxury? Well, it's the same word as self-indulgent. They're really very similar. It's the idea, again, of hoarding your wealth. It's not just that you have some nice things. You've hoarded. You've got way more than you can even use. That's what he's talking about. You're self-indulgent, thinking only of yourself and not what you could do to help other people. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. When the butcher goes to slaughter an animal, which one's he look for? The big one. You're just bringing this on yourself. You don't want that. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Again, it seems like murdered is hyperbole here. James is trying to make his point. This is how serious this is. Don't try to come up with an excuse. Don't try to rationalize. The person doesn't resist you. It definitely could be, he's turning the other cheek. But another translation of that is, should not God resist or oppose you? And that really makes sense. You've condemned and murdered the righteous person. Should not God resist you, oppose you? Doesn't just make sense. You have treated God's creatures that way. Don't you think you're going to face God's judgment for that? So again, what's the sin? What's the sin he's talking about? Well, definitely the fraud and dishonesty. That one's very clear. To have a laborer and then withhold his wages, that's there. But it's also the greed. Again, it's that hoarding, taking more than you could even use yourself. Well, how's it come from a lack of humility? And it was funny, I thought this one, which is the most obviously wrong, you had to think about a little bit. How's that a lack of humility to not give someone their wages or to be greedy? And I thought about it, why would someone do that? Well, I deserve all this stuff. I know that person doesn't have anything, but I deserve stuff tucked away in my closet I'm never going to use till the day I die. I deserve that. It's not loving your neighbor. Not valuing that other person as much as yourself, let alone above yourself. It's not following God's commands in general. The creator of the universe said, love your neighbor. And I'm saying, nope, not going to do it. Don't care what you say. And there's also the element, why do they have so much of this stuff? Well, there's an element that we do that because I'm trusting in that physical stuff and my ability to provide for future, uncertainties more than I'm trusting in God. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a savings, knowing I'm probably going to retire here, I'm going to live this long. It just makes sense. The Bible says that. But if it gets to the point that I'm trusting in that stuff versus God, that's the problem. That's basically saying I'm able to take care of myself better than God is. That's not being humble. That's saying I'm just as powerful as God. It's not saying it out loud. None of us would say, oh yeah, I'm just as powerful as God, but we act that way. This is why I say every sin struggle has a lack of humility as its cause. Every sin struggle. And again, these things that James has given us, they're not just examples. I think they're proofs. They're like, okay, I've made this bold assertion that if you humble yourself, that's what's behind all these quarrels and fights and whatever sin, lack of humility. And then I think James is saying, let me show you. Not just examples, but let me prove to you what I'm saying is true here. Well, as always, there's a root problem. There's something like, it's just, boy, this is the one that we've got to get to. And in here, I think it's the fact that we don't realize that humility is the main issue. We've been going around, and I know I've been trying to deal with this anger. And Lord, I got to quit getting angry. I got to stop getting angry. God, help me not to get angry. Don't try harder, but focus on God. But even then, I didn't realize this is the issue. It's a lack of humility, one way or the other. And in general, we just don't realize how essential and central and at the core of things humility is. If you were to ask a Christian, what are the 10 most important Christian traits? I don't know where humility would be on that. You'd have obedience and maybe, some of the kindness and gentleness and faithfulness. I don't know where humility would rank. But I'm saying it's not just number one on the list. It's like in its own whole list by itself. You can't have the other things if you don't have this. You're just pouring water into a bucket that has a hole in it. And so that's the root problem. I never even realized how important humility was. And I'm saying that myself. So what's the key to overcoming? Well, I think we have to view every situation, every sin struggle, every disunity we're having in a relationship as a humility issue, one aspect or the other. First of all, either that aspect that says, I'm not viewing God as God and realizing I'm not. What's that look like? Well, I'm not realizing that I don't know everything. And again, no one would raise their hand and say, I know everything. But how many times do we act like we know everything? How many times when we're in a situation with someone do we act like we know their motivation and they do something and we don't like it, but we don't stop to think about why are they doing it? Now, I'm not saying it makes it right, but boy, it makes it easier to understand and try to deal with. We act like we know their experience. The Chick-fil-A has a training video, and I think we showed it at Scottsdale in the past, where it just puts these little bubbles up around each person. It's like, this person just, lost their job. This person's struggling with their family, and you don't realize. But we act as if we do. And when I just get so angry at you, whatever, for what you're doing, I don't realize, man, maybe you're really having a struggle right now. Again, it doesn't make their sinful behavior right. Makes it understandable, though. Should change the way I try to deal with them. But I act like I know everything. I act like I deserve something. This is our culture, isn't it? The other day we were looking at some little meme on Facebook, and it was all about, and it just made so much sense. It's like, as a girl, I deserve someone who, loves me for who I am, and likes this and will do this, and and it sounds so good. And definitely, you don't deserve the opposite of someone who won't treat you with respect or will be absolutely. But do I really deserve a relationship in my life with someone who will love me for who I am? No. I'd love it. I like it. Glad I got it. I don't deserve it. But boy, we think we do. I think we absolutely do deserve that. We don't deserve that. And it just, again, it gets so down to the basics. I'm working on this sermon and I'm driving back from somewhere and there's a person in my lane. I'm in the middle lane and this person just starts slowing down. And slowing down and slowing down. And my thought is, I don't deserve to be behind someone who can't even drive the speed limit. And then this person makes a left turn out of the middle lane. I'm like, why in the world didn't you get in the left lane and slow down? Why'd you slow me down? And I didn't say the words, but the thought was, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve for that not to happen. I mean, what's it mean to deserve something? It means I've earned something. What have I earned? God's the creator and I'm the creature. What did I do to earn being created? Nothing. I'm just here. I didn't earn any of that. As a creature, I don't deserve anything. Matter of fact, as a sinner, as a creature who sinned, what I do deserve is wrath from God, and He's shown me grace instead. So I'm already been given way better and way more than I deserve. But boy, I forget that when I'm driving down the road and that guy's going slow in front of me. I don't deserve this. What about our expectations? They're sort of the same thing. I expect that things should happen a certain way. Again, this is a feature of our culture, isn't it? And we're fed this by others. Have it your way. Burger King and every place else. You do all these things just to have everything your way. To have it when you want it. And even dumb little things. Again, this week, God just has a way. That's why I want to preach on fluffiness next. I'm tired of being reminded of these tough stuff. I'm walking down the sidewalk and I'm kicking a rock. I try to kick the rocks off the sidewalk back into the rock yards or whatever. And I kick this rock and he stays on the sidewalk. Okay. I kick it one more time and I really kick it toward there now and it hits something and bounces back. I'm like, really? I didn't expect that to happen. And that's just a little thing that I don't expect. My whole life is based on I expect a certain thing. Anger, you never, anger is always about something happens I didn't expect. Negative. I don't mind if someone walks through the door and says, here's $1,000. I'm not expecting that, but I won't be angry about it. But if I expect something to happen and it doesn't happen as well, as good as I want it to, that's when I get angry. Well, where do these expectations come from? Why do I think I deserve things to go the way I expect? I'm not in control. I don't realize at that moment God's God and I'm not. I'm not even in control of a little rock going the place I want it to. God's God, I'm not. Or, so there's that side. I don't realize, remember, act like God's God and I'm not. Or, I don't value others above myself. How often is that at the root of our problems? I put my preferences over someone else, even if it's the preference not to get up off the couch to help someone. Darren knocked on the shower last night. Lisa, Charlie, and I are all sitting there. There wasn't one of us that wanted to get up and find out why she's knocking on the wall of the shower. Neither of us preferred to do that. But I was the one preaching the sermon, so I had to get up and do it. But how often is that at the basis of it? I just have my preference, and I value my preference over yours instead of the other way. Now, granted, if you're in a relationship and one person is always, insisting on their preference and you're not, there's a problem there that needs to be dealt with. But, what would a relationship be like if both of you are arguing over who gets to give up their preference? Probably wouldn't argue too much about that. Get along pretty well. Or the idea of our priorities. How often does that impact? Is that really a way of showing, do I really value others above myself? If I put my job before my spouse, if I put my hobby before my kids, if I put my Instagram and YouTube videos before my parents, don't spend some time with them. We'd like to see you too sometimes. That's me acting out, whether I'd say it or not, I don't value you above me. I'm not going to treat you like you're more important. See how this lack of humility is at the root of everything? Think of something. Think of anything. I think this is at the heart of it. So again, today, nothing major. But I was thinking about this. We'd all like to deal with maybe the surface issues. I don't like being angry, but I'd rather deal with not being angry than deal with the fact that I don't value someone as much as I value myself. That's really hitting home. I'll just keep working on not being angry, thank you. Keep pouring water in this bucket that's had a hole in it for years. This is the key. We need to view every sin, disunity problem as a humility issue. And then the second part of this, write this down if you're taking notes, we need to constantly work on being humble. Because it's one thing to realize humility is the problem. It's another then, okay, I'm going to be humble. Case in point, driving to church this morning. Someone in my lane driving really slow. I knew right away that humility's the problem here. I don't deserve to have anything different. But my first response is, I don't care. I don't care that humility's the issue, and to solve this, I need to be humble. I don't want to be. And so there's a part of that, not just to realize it's all about humility, but to realize I need to be humble and to work at it. And one key part of that is truly worshiping God, because what's the nature of true worship? Not sing a song, this or that. Those are expressions of worship. True worship is worthship. Focusing on, declaring, and acting like God is worthy above all, definitely above me. Well, what do I need to do now? How do we take this and live it out? Besides saying I don't want to ever hear James again. Actually, Mark said last week when we're done with James, we need to start James again, because it's that kind of book that, we probably need to go through it a few times. What do I need to do? I would ask a couple questions. First of all, what unhumble assumption underlies, first of all, my toughest sin? That one that I really struggle with. I've been struggling with for years. It keeps coming up. Just seems like there's no way to get a handle on it. What unhumble assumption underlies it? And I thought about myself. Again, when it comes to anger, it's not valuing others above myself. Things don't go the way I want. And, especially I've got such important goals. I'm a minister. I'm doing things for God. Well, certainly things should go my way. Don't be deceived. Satan's going to try to find some way to rationalize this. Ask the question, what unhumble assumption underlies my toughest sin? And then specifically, my frequent disunities. These issues that keep coming up between me and someone, whether it's a spouse or a child or a family member, a coworker, whatever it is, what is underlying that from my perspective? And again, I'm not saying it's one-sided. I've never seen a one-sided situation. And I'm not saying it's easy to fix. And you know what? The longer it's been going on, the harder it is to fix. But what I'm saying is if you don't deal with the hole in the bucket, you'll never fix it. To keep working at, getting along better, without finding out what's the unhumble assumption that underlies it and then working on that, you will never resolve those issues. You may not fight, you just won't say it, you won't do it, but you won't resolve the issues. You'll never fix without this.
Can we get a new bucket? No.
Get a new bucket, there we go. And the problem is I think we put the hole in our bucket, and so we'll put a hole in that one too. And again, also along the line of the relationships, demanding that it's equal, that they progress at the same rate as you. Well, I gave up one thing, you better give up one thing. I've made this much progress, you better make this much progress. That's not being humble either. Certainly not being unconditionally loving. All right, that's all I got.